line, it is necessary for us to wait on the board secretary to appear. She's off to run an errand. We will be with you momentarily. Thank you for your patience. Is Julie not coming? Good afternoon. I'm Jim Welch. I'm the president of the Kingsport Board of Education. I hereby call the special called meeting of the Kingsport Board of Education to order. Our first item of business is that we are required to make a determination that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Board members will be asked if they each have made a determination that meeting electronically is necessary for the reasons listed, and each will individually respond affirmatively. Ms. Altizer, would you call the roll, please?
Board President, Mr. Tim Welch.
Yes.
Board Vice President, Mrs. Julie Byers. She has not signed on.
Okay. So go to the next name. We have a quorum, so go to the next name.
Mr. Tim Dean.
Here.
Mr. Todd Golden.
No.
Mr. Eric Heisch.
Yes.
The consideration has passed. We will move to our item of business, which is consideration of a financial revision to the employment contract of our superintendent, Dr. Jeff Moorhouse. Mr. Eric Heisch has been working specifically on behalf of the board in producing this, so at this point I'll call Mr. Heisch to reflect his recommended action for the addenda to the contract. Mr. Heisch.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. As Dr. Moorhouse and I talked, he expressed to me a desire to pursue something that would increase his retirement benefits without increasing his base salary, which is a strategy that I agree with, and that's the basis on which we proceeded negotiation. So we came up with 6 recommendations. The recommendations are: number 1, to increase the travel allowance to $600 a month, increase the home office allowance to $275 a month, to, after consultation with TCRS, we agreed that we could include the travel allowance and the home office allowance as creditable compensation for retirement purposes. So that's item number 3. The 4th item is if the superintendent retires from KCS with at least 6 years of service, then the superintendent receives the same health insurance benefits in retirement as do other KCS employees. Number 5, KCS will contribute 3% of compensation into a deferred compensation plan run by Retire Ready Tennessee. And number 6, if the superintendent retires from KCS, then KCS will pay a one-time lump sum payment equivalent to 3 years of 20% of compensation, and that is compensation at the time of retirement. And those are the 6 recommendations.
Okay. Thank you. Would you make that as a motion that the board approve these?
Is this not up for discussion?
Oh, we're going to discuss it after. We've got to get a motion in a second.
I move that we accept these recommendations for the increase in compensation for the superintendent.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded now for discussion. Mr. Golden?
Right, I didn't want to jump ahead of anybody.
No, it's fine.
Okay. So I'm just trying to understand, is this on? There it goes. All right. I'm just trying to understand number 6. So this is 3 years of 20% compensation. So this would be 20% of the base times 3 at the point in which Dr. Moorhouse would then file for retirement, correct?
What was the last thing you said?
So if Dr. Moorhouse filed for retirement then this payment would come due effective immediately.
Yeah, once he retires and begins collecting from TCRS, in other words, he's officially retired,
Right.
then yes, this, originally we had discussed doing that as over 3 years, but that's not allowed under TCRS rules.
Sure, sure. But what I'm saying is there's nothing in here to prevent Dr. Moorhouse from retiring as soon as we sign this contract.
I believe that I believe the language has the same as the 6 years of service that's in number 4.
Is it in the contract written that way, that it's a 6?
Yes.
Okay, because it wasn't called out on the email, so
Yeah.
that's why I asked that question. So,
Yes.
so there has to be another 3 more years of employment in order to receive that 20% retirement payment, correct? Okay.
That's correct.
So there was 6 years of total service.
Right.
I got you. And roughly, how much is that?
So if you, at his current rate, right now, it's about $109,000.
Would be a total?
Sorry.
The total?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's 60% basically of your base salary, automobile allowance, and home allowance.
Okay.
This is what I understood what made up his compensation. So rather than put 3 times 20%, I just told Eric, let's make it 60% because it gets confusing when you start doing math odd. And so if you take what he, or at least what I think he earns, his base pay and the new pay he'll get in his home allowance and his auto allowance under this contract, add all that together and then multiply it times 3 and then take 60%, it's about $109,000.
Okay. So, but that would require an extra 3 years of employment here in order to,
It requires 2 things. It requires an extra 3 years of employment, and he will have to retire and collect Tennessee Consolidated Retirement Benefits to get that.
right, okay. Okay.
So next year, his contract renewal comes up.
Sure.
So he would have to have a renewal through that time.
Right.
In order to collect, yes.
Right, so the renewal would have to take place, the renewal would have to be an extra 3 years, because didn't we do a 3 and then a 2?
Right.
So it's at 5, so there's
No,
2?
no.
No, what was it?
No. But right now, I would be at 6 years at the end of this contract.
Okay.
You can only do a 4-year contract.
I can only do a
Tennessee
4-year
law.
contract.
Yeah.
So
you can't
at
do-
2 years, we
So
can-
I still have 3 more years left on this contract.
Okay, that's what I was trying to, I
Yes.
apologize.
Yeah.
And that was the reason for the wording at 6 is that if at the end of this contract, there was not an extension, then,
And legally, based upon his years of service and his age at that time, he would be able to collect retirement benefits from the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System.
In 3 more years
Yes.
is what you're saying? Okay, yeah, no, that's what I was trying to understand, because that was the one point I did not understand
Okay.
in the emails.
that is not my desire to retire in 3 years. I would now have a grandchild, and I know that my wife is already spending money on baby clothes there. So I've got to work till I die, so.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm just interested in kind of a really short executive overview of why we entered this kind of process with the package versus a full, salary review and steps and those kinds of things, like a 3% merit increase or whatever, cost of living
Well,
increase.
so-
Is it designed?
So if I can just step in as a matter of opinion here.
sure.
Part of our issue is our source of merit increases to build those in has been vanquished by the holding
Right.
harmless on, so we really have nothing to go on in terms of fixing a bonus type or referring to a bonus type situation, a performance bonus.
Yes.
Dr. Moorhouse, my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, did not request a percentage increase in his salary. Instead, these are step up in payments that we are already making in terms of allowances allotted to him. Is that correct?
That's
So
correct.
since you wanted to bake merit increases into these,
Right.
rather than just like a salary increase, I mean, that's the way I read it, but I'm not sure about the why part.
The insurance piece is really just modifying the 10-year rule down to 6. That's not
Right.
I mean, obviously, it wouldn't be in there, and really, the reporting of salary is just, it's not taking any more, it's just how we report it to TCRS.
So I think for the at-home viewers, the hold harmless might be better to be explained to them, because I guarantee there's a lot of people watching right now have no idea what we're talking about in this.
The hold harmless has to do with the evaluation of educational staff, teachers, administrators, across the board, are currently, by legislation in the state of Tennessee, exempted from having financial penalties based on the performance of students on standardized tests, which is how that is generally accomplished. Those tests are then reported by schools, and the school funding and things of that nature are generally done based on those kind of quantitative criteria. That criteria is off the board right now, and will be off the board through next year, as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
So we're in limbo on a lot of that now.
Right, so that was done at the state level.
It's a state. That's not a local decision.
So then the question would be, since this is a way to increase salary there, the teachers, and the whole harmless, everybody else is frozen as far as a penalty, right? But as far as increasing compensation for other people within the school system, what would be the matter in which that would be addressed?
Just a step increase?
We've got a step, yes,
increase?
we moved from a pay scale that was incentive-based
Sure.
to built-in steps with that, and so we've moved our pay scale into a situation where there wouldn't, based on performance, there wouldn't be a financial impact, so that they're going to be moving up to their next scheduled step. Those people also this year that are behind in steps, right now our steps in our years for a portion of our employees don't line up, because that got out of line for that period of time that we were on a single lane pay scale. And so right now, the plan is in this next year, those people who are behind in steps will be making up, besides their scheduled step, will be making up 25% of the steps that they are off this year. So we intend over the next 4 years to be able to get everybody back in line. We got offline over 6 years. We're going to get back line. Our plan is to be back online within 4. So those people who are off steps will be getting an additional 25% of the steps made up this year, besides their scheduled step.
And when would the learning loss, as far as financially, be addressed?
So well, right now we've got summer camp plannings.
Right, but the financial aspects of the performance, I know that the state has handcuffed all the school boards for this year and next year potentially, correct? So if that's the case, at what point does that then come to bear up as far as compensation? So if the state legislature says, all right, after 2 years, that's it, we're done, anything after that, learning loss, it's not made up. So say if 2019 and 2020, we saw a decrease in learning loss, decrease in testing, et cetera. 2021, it's not remedied. Then at what point do we draw a line and say at 2022 versus the 2021 or 2020? Because I think a lot of people, as being stewards of this money and these tax dollars, would want to know where we're going to address those losses. And it all comes down to the school board, right? And at the superintendent level and down. And so if we're going to talk about compensation, I think it's important that we also address that as well, that there is a plan in place to address that. Because if
we're happy to do a special presentation for the Board of Education to talk about what our summer learning camps are going to be looking like, what our plan for addressing learning loss is. That's part of our requirements under our ESSER dollars, is to have plans that specifically address learning loss through programs, after-school programs, tutoring, summer camps,
Sure.
things of that nature. That's what we're currently submitting plans. We have to submit those plans to the state to be able to get our ESSER dollars.
Sure.
And so we've been drafting those plans right now. So right now, we've just submitted our plans for ESSER 2. We haven't even received the information on ESSER 3 yet, but we're working on those plans, because 20% of your ESSER dollars, which we'll discuss later, 20% of your ESSER dollars that you receive have to go to learning loss.
Correct, right. And so, again, for the at-home audience, a lot of this is kind of understanding because there's a lot of people watching right now.
Sure.
Okay. And so the ESSER dollars are federal funds that come back to the individual districts, right. And those are in the form of to remediate the loss and those type things.
Correct.
Right.
And they're one-time dollars.
Right, one-time
One-time dollars.
Correct. So what I'm trying to address is the fact that at what point, because there is a compensation piece tied to testing and,
Not in our district anymore.
Not,
We have moved off
Yeah.
of, moved off a performance pay scale. And so testing does not impact pay
For our
for our
teachers.
employees.
sure, I'm talking about at your level.
Oh, sure,
Okay,
gotcha.
Yeah. So at that level, addressing that, that's something that I know I've had people ask me about, is how we're going to address going forward in the future, specifically at this level, at your level, what that compensation would look like and when do those come into play? When does that, when the states remove those remove those roadblocks, when does that come into play?
so let me try to answer the question. God knows I cannot speak for the state legislature. But I think the intent of spending on catch-up camps, whatever we want to call these, and the implementation of special programs to catch up for that learning loss through that special legislative session that we had, is dependent upon the system to implement those programs to try to remedy any learning loss. Understand that we do not yet have, to my knowledge, a quantitative grasp of exactly what that learning loss, if any, is. But we are going to implement remedial type programs to address a loss that may exist, right? So after we have done that, which is why I'm thinking they are extending the hold harmless through another year, is we're going to be starting to implement those programs this summer, is that correct?
Correct.
So we have those programs this summer. We'll probably have some additional programs during the next school year. And so after that time, after those additional programs have been implemented, in addition to the regular school program, then they can get back onto where school systems, various schools, whatever, are evaluated by their scores, which would probably involve reestablishing a baseline. So what I'm thinking, and it's just me, Todd, what I'm thinking is we're probably looking at 2022, 23 as the first year where we'll be able, after the testing in the spring of 23, will be the first time that we're really able to grasp that.
Sure, and I think there
Yeah.
needs to be a compensation piece at the superintendent level for that responsibility of obtaining those grades and returning us back to the levels that we need to be at.
Well,
That's the point of me bringing this up, is
Okay.
because that's a situation that needs to be addressed and at least place-held and put in place, because if nobody's responsible for those grades, if nobody's responsible for that, then where does it come into
So
play?
what if he outperforms expectations? You gonna bonus him up?
Well, that's a great conversation to have, yeah.
So-
well, I think that's a discussion for our contract negotiation for next year on the contract renewal. The item of business as it currently stands does not include that as an item. But it is certainly something that we can sit down and consider for implementation into its contract for the following year. There's no way we can measure that this year.
Sure, so the point of me bringing all this up is the part of the 3 years and the $109,000 payout.
Okay?
And if you put that at a 3-year clip, and we're not able to actually look at that as far as payout, so at 3 years, Dr. Moorhouse would be eligible for that payout. We're not even able to look at that testing potentially and grades and the remediation or bringing kids back up to snuff until potentially past 3 years from right now.
Why would that be?
I'm sorry?
Why would that be?
Well, if we're handcuffed for this year and next year, then it's the third year, right? So at the third year is potentially after we take a snapshot of what the testing looks like and then put a plan in place and then see if you either hit that mark by the third year. That would be at the end of the potential contract.
Testing will still take place.
Correct.
And we will still have testing for this year
Right.
and for next year and for the year after.
Right, but there's no compensation piece we can put in place there to motivate an improvement in those testing scores.
You're talking about at the executive level.
Correct.
Right. My understanding by legislation is we cannot do that this year. We probably cannot do that next year. So if we cannot do it next year, then we cannot include it in the contract this year. Mr. Billingsley, I'll yield to you on that.
I wouldn't include it in the contract this year. No. I mean, who knows what the legislature will do in 2
Yeah.
years? It'll be a different legislature than there is right now. If I might, I don't want to break this conversation, but I want to go back to the 109,000. That's a rough number. Part of that was based on his base pay of 2018. It'll be higher 3 years from now, whatever you, ladies and gentlemen, decide to raise his salary over the next, his compensation over the next 3. It'll just be 60% of whatever his base salary. If you prefer a number, that's up to the board, but that's the way it would be calculated right now. So the 109,000 is a rough number.
That's a rough number.
Okay.
That's fine.
That's what made everybody understand. It's not, Dr. Moorhouse isn't going to quit in 3 years and get $109,000. He's going to get some more.
Correct, yeah, no, I understood that part. It's just
Okay.
that I'm just throwing it out there because it's the only
I just
number I
want to
have.
make sure.
Sure.
Because you mentioned
Sure.
that, I thought, I don't want to be, it's not concrete. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's my only concern is that there's the potential of, if we don't get the grades in place, if we don't put that down as an expectation at the executive level, and that isn't addressed, then where is it held accountable?
It's one of those questions to me, it's kind of like the question I was asking last work session, I think, on the option of learning remotely. You know, the next step down the line on all those things start to pop up, because we're seeing a little bit of, hopefully, light at the end of the tunnel.
Right.
And to me, that's what you're asking, is the same nature, in that, okay, when things, we get to where we can get to a normal, somewhat normal state, we got to look back and see how our performance was and dissect it, and that'd be a big part of it, is the leader in charge. I would think you could build it as a school board to, I mean, not anything you wanted, but you could include that in the language of your evaluation, could you not, Mike?
Absolutely. It could be an expectation that the board has of the superintendent that he'll achieve a certain level. It may not be achievable, but if you have that expectation of him, he fails to do that, that goes into his evaluation, however you see it. But on the other hand, somebody, I think Tim said, if he does bang up job,
Right.
you got to address that too.
Absolutely.
You're all fives or whatever
Yeah.
his evaluation is, and he should be rewarded for that too. So
Because when we went to the step process, right, there was some on the board who wanted there to be some type of compensation based on performance.
Right.
Right, and that didn't pass. We went to the steps, but the prevailing idea was, well, take it away from the teachers, but put the performance process at the top, and that's how we make sure that we hit those metrics, is at the executive level. So I think that actually aligns with
Right.
at least two
Yeah.
board members who had that concern, right, and a third, and unfortunately, Tim, you weren't here at that time, but that puts into place some parameters going forward that we will see an increase in these test scores and an increase in learning, because if not, we could be dealing with this potentially after 3 years.
I'm one who wanted to put it there, and I would want to put it there to this moment. But the state legislature says it's a hold harmless thing, and we have a contract to deal with right now.
Sure.
And I think the
That's where I am.
appropriate, I am in agreement with you, and I think the appropriate time is when we take our next steps through the superintendent evaluation process, which we have established. And the specific parameters of that evaluation are obviously what we set for our goals every year. And I think if, once we see what the potential learning loss might be, I think it's certainly fair to put some of those parameters in the evaluation for the following year, whenever that time-wise is appropriate. It's not necessarily a part of this discussion, but it's definitely something that we need to put, in terms of an evaluation going forward.
Yeah, so my point for bringing it up in this discussion is because we have at-home viewers, and people are going to have had that question, to raise that question, and also to put it out there so that it's been discussed at a board meeting. It is now been put on notice, and that is something that we will be looking forward to going forward. Thank you.
I'm with you on that.
Perfect, thank you.
All right? Ready to vote? Ms. Altizer, if you'll call the roll, please.
Mrs. Byers,
Present.
You got, is that a yes?
we're voting on the item. The contract.
Yes.
Yes, that's a yes.
Mr. Dean,
Aye.
Mr. Golden,
Aye.
Mr. Heiss,
Aye.
Mr. Welch.
Aye. Motion has passed unanimously, and this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
guys. Good-
Appreciate it,
this is a good
Counselor. Thank you,
discussion,
sir.
by the way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
You get the draft
I
finalized, and
don't
I'll
believe for a minute that
John
Dr.
here.
Moorhouse was taking the
Welch, I'm the president of the Kingsport Board of Education. I welcome those of you who are joining us electronically for this work session that we're called to order. And I welcome the members of the Board of Mayor and Aldermen and the city staff to join with us this afternoon for this discussion. Point of personal privilege here, let me first say how wonderful it is to be on a school board that has a relationship with its co-governing body as we feel that we have with the BMA here in Kingsport. We feel a tremendous amount of support from you in delivering the quality education package that you expect us to do. And it's just, as we look around, not only in our own area, but in beyond our own area, and see where there is diversion between governing bodies, it's a delight to be in a community like this and to be able to work together in situations such as this. The second thing it's a delight is that we have ESSER dollars, which make this discussion a whole lot nicer perhaps than it might otherwise be, because as schools, with the availability of those federal funds, that we're going to be able to do a number of things that will be discussed today that we would not have otherwise been able to do without doing some serious wrangling. So this discussion is not going to be nearly as difficult for either of us, I think, as a result of that. We still have our challenges in front of us, but as an educational system, we're thankful for those new funding that will make some of the things that we have on the plan more possible. It is my plan as the chair of this meeting that we will be out of here by 6:30. I hope that's okay with you. And to help kind of further that along, I'm going to ask that you'll recall that the last time we met, we agreed where we were was phase 1 in that program. That's still where we are. That's what most of us who are in this room inherited, was the phase 1, moving toward that project, particularly in the renovation of the Sullivan North property, moving Sevier to the Sullivan North property, and Jackson to the current Sevier. So those are the two major stones in that. If we can hold our hypothetical discussions about the what was or what could be until we get through the what is's, I think we can be out of here on time. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Dr. Moorhouse and his staff to make the presentations for us.
May I ask one question?
Sure.
Before we do that, we need to do the determination that it's electronic meeting, please.
We
The board needs to do it, and the board member also need to do it. Roll call.
all right, we can do that, certainly. I'll do it for the Board of Education first, if that's okay. The board is required to make a determination that meeting electronically is necessary to protect the health, safety, and welfare of Tennesseans in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. Board members will be asked if they each have made a determination that meeting electronically is necessary for the reasons listed, and each will individually respond affirmatively. Ms. Altizer, if you'll call the roll of the BOE, please, ma'am.
Board President, Mr. Jim Welch.
Yes.
Board Vice President, Mrs. Julie Byers.
Yes.
Mr. Tim Dean.
Yes.
Mr. Todd Golden.
Yes.
And Mr. Eric Hodge.
Yes.
The board has passed unanimously. Mayor Schul.
Thank you. A determination by the board that meeting electronically with limited physical presence of the public at the meeting is necessary to protect public health, safety, and welfare of all concerned in light of the COVID-19 virus. How say you, Alderman Duncan? I affirm. Thank you, Alderman Cooper. Alderman Phillips.
I affirm.
Vice Mayor George.
I affirm.
I also affirm. Chris, are other members with us electronically today?
If they are, they're watching, they're not participating.
Okay. That's what I was going to
All right.
ask.
Mayor Shillati, you asked for the floor, though, if you wanted to say something.
My question was what I sort of posed to Chris.
Okay.
Our two members, are they able to follow this electronically today? Are they on Zoom?
We have one on Zoom. So I don't,
Facebook, is it YouTube?
this
Yes,
is.
it is on
this-
YouTube.
It is on YouTube.
It's electronically.
It's electronically on YouTube and on Zoom. Is that
So-
correct?
Both members that are not present today were provided both of those links.
Okay, good. That was my question. And other than that, thank you for having us. We appreciate keeping the dialogue going between the two boards.
Thank you. Now, Dr. Moorhouse.
So, but, I know every time you start, calling out people, you forget some, but I would be really remiss if I did take the opportunity to say to the mayor and to the board here, just echo what has been said, grateful for the relationship that we have. Kudos to Chris McCart and his team. I also want to acknowledge the work of David Fry and Andy True. We've been working to try to lead up to this meeting today and trying to take the information from both boards, trying to get us to a path that what we present today addresses individual conversations that we've had and that hopefully what you see today is a reflection of that work that's been going on for several months. And so grateful to all them. Also grateful to our sound and technician today. Setting up for an event like this is a little bit different than setting up for standard board meetings, and so there's a lot of work by a lot of people that went into making today happen. So again, if I didn't call it out, I also want to say, just know that there's a lot of people that had a lot of hands in this, and we're grateful to all of them. And so with that said, we'll go through here. There's going to be a couple slides here at the beginning that if you want to stop at, you let me know. But I'm going to go through a brief, as quickly as I can, history tour to where we've been, where we've gotten to. So this started back in 2013, 2014, Together for Tomorrow. Partnering in education to expand opportunities for all students. This was a partnership that Kingsport and Sullivan County went in to do a facility study. The starting point was a need for space, looking at DB having exceeded its capacity as currently constructed at that point in time. There was a visioning process that started in January of 2013 to look at DB, what the space needed to reflect. And so, again, both school systems, both governments entered into a facility studies with Dejan Richter. In early 2014, there was an Education Futures Conference that took place there in May of 2014. That conference had many representatives on it. You see the Superintendent Board of Education, Dejan Richter, steering committee members. We still have two of our board members from that point in time are still on our board right now. Mr. Gold and Mr. Heish. You also see in the steering committee members, we have members of Chris McCart was on that at that time, and you will also see some other names that reflect government, community members as well. The plan was to be very strategic in the careful use of financial resources if there was going to be a bond initiative. I won't go through all of that, but that just shows the different phases and the different types of meetings that took place over the course of a year, okay? You see steering committee meetings there, again, starting in September, ending in March. Community dialogue meetings in November and January. Facility study timeline, and then we got back a capital plan that came in 3 phases to be implemented over a 15-year period and end in 2029. That was at that point in time. I'm sorry, I hope I'm not going too fast as we go through this. There was a bond issue from Sullivan County that was issued that generated $140 million in bonds. I don't have my glasses on. So 19.27 million to Bristol City, 44 to Kingsport City, and 88 to Sullivan County. Of that 44, 20 is represented in Sullivan North. Approval timeline went to the Board of Education, County Commission, to the BMA. And so all of this is to just kind of reflect that this wasn't something that was rushed into. This wasn't something that was done in a closet. And this wasn't something that didn't seek community input into the decisions. Out of that came the following capital project that we're talking about really right now. As a Board of Education, I came in really just as this was coming into fruition. So picking up, trying to get a phase one accomplished. And what phase one represents is the construction of the STEM Center, which we were able to accomplish and get that done last year. And, grateful to have that space there at Dobbins-Bennett. I think that our community can be very proud of that. And so we have been able to get that one ticked off. Repurpose an existing facility reflecting Sullivan North, complete identified renovation needs, and enlarge cafeteria. Oh, I'm sorry, this was just within Dobbins-Bennett High School, what needed to happen there. Also, purchase and renovate Sullivan North and prepare for Kingsport transition. We will be acquiring Sullivan North as the facility starting July 1, if not sooner, as soon as they can vacate, but definitely by July 1. Renovate Sevier Middle School, prepare for elementary school transition, and close Jackson Elementary. That was what is reflected in phase one. And so, with that, you see phase one, phase two, which looks at a new middle school, working with some elementary schools, and phase three. Really, phases 2 and 3 could be flip-flop, whatever sequence the Board of Education and the community would want to do once we got to those items on that list. But we're, again, fully focused on trying to get this accomplished right here in phase one of this facilities plan. Just for our public to know, everything that I just shared in the last 5 minutes can be found on our website. It has been there located the entire time. If you go to our homepage and click on the left side, there's a facility study, and those are the clicks that take you to where that plan resides, and it's there for public consumption. So with that, some of the things that have to be considered is that these are our facilities that we have. And as you can see there, our average age of facility that we have in Kingsport City Schools is 70 years old. With this year being the 100th anniversary of Jackson. But we have an average age of facility that's 70 years old. We have, and you can see the last renovation. What we're discussing while we're talking about phase one, we're also going to be talking about this in a broader perspective because as you can see in date of last renovation, this community made an investment in facilities 30 years ago that those investments are end-of-life investments. You know, that when you replace a roof, 30 years later, you have to replace it again. When you do an HVAC unit, 30 years later, you have to do another HVAC unit. You have to replace carpet, things of that nature. The things that we're discussing today are not a reflection of poor maintenance of our facilities as we talk about the dollars that we need to spend. Just to the contrary, I think that there's a lot of, while there's some concern on that slide, I think there's also a lot of pride on that slide, that I want to say kudos to our maintenance staff, that we are able, because of careful use and conservative practices, we're able to use a 100-year-old building, okay, as a school. And that, if you walked into our buildings, we've just have done with the help of the city and the capital funds that they give us in our budget every year, we've been able to do a lot of things. David Fry in managing our fund balance. You know, we utilize our fund balance many times that we don't have to come to the BMA to address some of the issues that don't become tax conversations on down the line. And so in careful use of our fund balance, in careful use of our budgeting with the city, we've been able to maintain our facilities really well. But with that said, I think that you can identify that we have one school that's 100. We have another school that's this year. So one school that's 100, another school that's 89, another school that's 87, and another school that's 84. And those all sit on the west side of town. Okay? And so, so while we're talking about phase one, I think that we also have to recognize the age of some of our facilities. 2 of those were acquired by the city on down the line, that being Kennedy and Roosevelt. Those did not initiate as city school buildings, okay? And so with that also factors into why we would move Sevier to Sullivan North. If the purpose, part of the purpose of doing this is to sunset our oldest building at 100 years, then you have to have a place to put that school. If you're going to close one, you have to have a place to move one. And so by moving Sevier to the Sullivan North site, we will now move Jackson to the Sevier location and address the oldest building that's on that list. I also want to draw attention that as we talk about this, is that it's really easy to think that it's just Sevier that's going out to Sullivan North. That once that school is relocated, there will be a redistricting of schools to balance enrollment and to balance demographics between. We'll move kind of from being an east-west alignment to more of a north-south alignment as we talk about those schools. So as you think about things, as we talk about the future, things won't be aligned the way they are currently to 100%. Enrollment projections, I guess to add validity to the facility study, back in June of 2015, they had an annual middle school enrollment by 1/15/21 of 1743. The John Richter did when they gave us this study, and what we are at, the projected the actual projected enrollment is 1743. The projected enrollment that the John Richter gave us then was 1763. So we're 20 students off of what they projected back in 2015. And so that's pretty solid estimations right there. Current school capacities, as we click through these slides, these are current school capacities as they are this year. This doesn't reflect, right now, there's, through conversations with the city, there's 13 housing developments that are going on within the city that, based on formulas that we have, we anticipate in the next 12 to 18 months, based on those kinds of formulas, that it would generate 200 plus new students into our school systems, into our school system. So as we talk about capacities, Those are capacities as we have them today and don't reflect whatever that number is going to be over the next 12 to 18 months. And with that said, the preponderance of, so I'll just go through there. So right now, as programmed, Adams is at 96.6% capacity. Jackson is at 69.5%. Jefferson's at 86%. Johnson's at 87%. Excuse me. Kennedy's at 74. Lincoln 70. Roosevelt 76. Washington 80.9. Our middle school, Robinson is over capacity, right there at 101%. And Severe's at 80.1. And then our high school, now that we have the STEM center built on there, that we have increased capacity, and we're sitting at 82% there. So as a district total, when you take that top to bottom, we're currently at 87% capacity within all of our buildings. As was mentioned before, the thing that has really changed the conversation right now has been the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds that have come to school districts. Just to kind of give you a history on that, ESSER funds, ESSER 1 that came to our district was $1.6 million. ESSER 2 was in the neighborhood of about 7.6, is that right, Dr. Stringham? $7.6 million. The change that happened when we got ESSER $2 is that there was a requirement that 20% of those dollars had to be spent on learning loss programs. And then the remaining could be spent on one-time capital types of projects. ESSER 3, we just got notification, and ESSER $2 have to be spent by September of 23. September of 2023. So we have a timeline, we have guidelines on what we can spend those things. They have to be tied back to COVID impact as we talk about that. So things like HVAC units, things like you can increase space at buildings. If you talk about that you need to increase spacing, you know, like you could add classrooms, but you can't do brand new construction with these dollars. There's limitations and guidelines for how the dollars can be spent, okay, in a ballpark. And I won't take you through all the general allowable uses, but you can see that we've got guidelines for that. And so as we get to ESSER 3, we also know that in ESSER 3, we got just over $17 million. Once you account for the 20% for learning loss, that gives us about $13 million, a little over $13 million that we can put towards capital projects, which is really encouraging. We also found out on Friday that with ESSER $3, that they have extended the deadline for when that has to be spent to currently it's September 2024. Correct, Mr. Fry? He's the one. If he's shaking his head yes, no, I know that I'm still going good. He's still shaking his head yes, and so yes.
Hey, Dr. Moorhouse, when you say spent, could spent be interpreted as committed? Say you let a contract and, you know, that's ongoing?
So currently, no.
No?
Currently, the interpretation is it has to be spent. It can't be obligated. It has to be spent and project completed. And that was a lot of what we were saying as district leaders back to our legislators, is that there's great concern in that, is that we're incredibly grateful for the money, okay? But it felt like to get all of that spent by September of 23 was kind of like trying to shove an elephant down a funnel. You know, is that There's limited number of tradesmen. There's limited number of brick masons, things of that nature. And it's not just Kingsport that has this money. It's everybody in the whole country. And so if everybody's trying to get this kind of work done at the same time, with these dollars, getting it done in a longer time frame is better than a shorter time frame, because you could have a project committed and just be on the list, and based under the guidelines, you could not have it spent and just miss out on the window. And so with ESSER 3, we know that there's been another year added to that from that standpoint. Ms. George asked this question the other day, and so this one's for you, Ms. George. And so in there, so some other items of considerations. And so in Sullivan North, the electrical, the annual electrical, it is $357, and water's $40. You can see what it is for Jackson. There is going to be a difference. What this doesn't factor into is some other facility considerations that we're moving into, is that to help defer that cost as well, is that it is our intent on July 1 that we'll be moving our maintenance facilities out to Sullivan North in the vocational area, and our school nutrition facilities out there as well, which would vacate that building there on Myrtle Street, that we could turn back over to the city for redevelopment. It would also be our desire to, if we could find a location for Cora Cox, to completely vacate that piece of property back to the city for redevelopment. I think that could benefit both sides from that standpoint. So what the other thing I would say is that's reflecting also a 40-year-old AC system, that we think that number will go down as we get more efficient systems in place, because most of the things there are 40 years old.
And did you also consider the outdoor maintenance and mowing and that type of thing as a?
We do. It's not reflected right there, and I don't have that number in front of you right now.
In looking just, and you shouldn't have referenced me because now I have a question. When you just said Cora Cox, you were looking to move, and knowing how much square footage is available at North, has there been any, and you probably have this in your thing, any consideration to moving Cora Cox into a section of North, and therefore the grounds would be the same, the utility would be the same, the cafeteria, there'd be a great deal of savings?
So those are conversations that we would need to have with our Board of Education about programming and things of that nature, about what the future is of that. I would say it's not, currently I would say that it's not best practice that in alternative settings that you have those on general population campuses. But right now I would say anything's on the board in consideration for what we would do to try to help vacate that space.
I was just seeing if you'd had that conversation because you brought up moving them.
Oh, yeah, no, and so those are things that in our future board retreats that we have to kind of lay out what we want to get accomplished over the next several years to help facilitate this plan. The other thing that has to be a conversation, not today, but down the road, is once we vacate Jackson, is what's the desire of the city for what we do with Jackson? Potential use options are to return to the city for future development, repurpose for additional KCS usage. Obviously, we have some things that that could be up for consideration, or any number of ideas. But I think that that's going to be something that we'll have to readdress about what do you want us to do with Jackson at that point in time, because we would be vacating that space. And this is just really sharing what I had already shared with you, which is transition KCS facilities from current Myrtle Street location into Sullivan North and other spaces to be determined. Items not included in the capital estimates that we'll be sharing with you is the paving of the parking area at Sullivan North. Right now, we don't need to pave that for use as a high school. I mean, it'll be a middle school, and so really looking at that scope. Traffic control and striping, also at Dobbins Bennett, this doesn't include any work that needs to be done at J. Fred Johnson. But I know that Chris McCart and I have had conversations about ideas of how that kind of work could get done. And so I'm sure that that will be a conversation on down the line as well. But I just want to be fully transparent what numbers include.
On Jackson School, what acreage or what size is your property there? Do you know, compared to the size of like Kennedy and Roosevelt? Is Jackson larger in the footprint or not?
Footprint, I don't have that answer in front of me right now. It's something I could get for you and let you know. I would say that the footprint of Jackson would probably, I know the footprint at Roosevelt is larger. There's a good piece of land around Roosevelt. But at Kennedy, I would say that Kennedy's smaller. And I'm looking back at the people that would know, and they're shaking their heads. I would say Kennedy's smaller, but so from that standpoint.
That's what I was thinking. Kennedy was really little when I was up there, so thank you.
And conversation for on down the line is, I mean, if we got into phase 2, there's thoughts about what phase 2 and all that other stuff could look like. But I think that would derail us if we started going down that line. So in our 10-year facilities outlook, what I would tell you is, before I click the slide, is that the numbers that we have that we feel good about, I won't say that they're right, spot on, but we've worked with architects to develop estimates around Dobbins Bennett, around Sullivan North, and around Sevier. Okay, so the numbers that we have around those 3 facilities, we feel good about because architects have looked into that. Everything else that we have beyond that is based on educated guess. I mean, from our standpoint, we've not employed a contractor or an architect to look at what the cost at Washington's going to be 5 years from now. But we've got, based on what roofing costs today, you know, this is what we think it would cost 5 years from now. And so beyond those 3 facilities, all those others are educated guesses. So in that, understand that as you see over the next 10 years, the work that we need to have done in our facilities across the district over the next 10 years, you can see obviously in year 21, 22, that's where that's where the Sullivan North project sits. In 22, 23 is where, by and large, the Sevier renovation sits. Is that correct, Mr. Fry? And so it would, and you can see by school the estimated costs that we have scheduled to be done. Those, besides the obvious at North, those costs that are in other schools reflect roofs, reflect HVAC units, reflect carpeting, things of those nature that need to be done. Okay, and those are just scheduled replacements to be in there. Over the next 10 years, that represents an investment of $68.689 million.
What is in your, the citywide, what is that, those numbers, what are? the
System-wide?
System-wide, yeah, sorry.
Mr. Fry?
In the 21-22, the 2.4 million represents complete light replacements, light replacements throughout the whole system.
Okay. So that's your big one right there, and
Yes.
that's just because.
Hey, guys, you need to speak up because if you don't have a mic, I can't hear a thing. I can only hear Dr. Moorhouse.
Can you hear me?
I can now, but I think it's Colette speaking and I haven't heard anything except a little voice.
Sorry. It was all, everything I said was brilliant too, just so you know. Is that on? Okay. Okay.
I wanted to make sure I wasn't missing any of that brilliance.
Yeah, well, but yeah, okay, I understand.
Thank you.
Yes.
I'm good, I just needed to know what that number
That's
was.
fine. So with that, what, in working with Chris and his team and David Fry, the revenue sources to address that, we came before you with budget amendments. You know, we put aside $7 million, you know, in fund transfers, fund balance, things of that nature that we put before you in amendments this past week. And looking at other revenue sources, what you see in ESSER 2.0 dollars is what we could spend out of ESSER 2.0. Well, then let's just go through there. Fund balance, transfers, right now, based on what we have right now, is you have about $3 million out of the school system's fund balance. We're required by the state to maintain a 3% fund balance. That's the state's level of threshold. The David Fry level of threshold is 4%, and I trust the David Fry threshold more than I trust the state threshold. And so based on that calculation, that right now gives us $3 million of fund balance that we can put to our projects. We have an annual CIP funding from the city of $300,000. We also, in reflecting what we brought before the BMA, is current projects, consolidating projects down, gets us to nearly $5 million that we have consolidated in current projects. There's a donation there. We also have our ESSER dollars that reflect, you know, about, what would you, $17 million worth of ESSER dollars when you combine ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 together. 13 million, and you know, 17 there. We also have been in conversation with a consultant that we've done some work with, ESG, that we can qualify for an EESI loan for another $5 million, which we could do $5 million worth of projects that we could fund out of our energy savings. They qualify for more than that. We're only comfortable doing that. We don't want to have to bond out anything. And so what we could, instead of bonds, we can qualify for $5 million worth of work and pay for that out of our operations budget, the maintenance on that debt. And then this is where the BMA would come into. It would, we would need this many new city bonds issued each year for the next 10 years to be able to come up with the dollars necessary to complete all those projects. So, I will breathe at this point and try to field questions. I know I rushed through it, but I'm trying to give as much time for discussion as possible. So I'll stop.
I have a question, of course.
Okay?
Okay, just a couple of questions, just real quick on when you are taking the $5 million loan that you're talking about here, what kind of, what's your payout time in that, or is those loans available for?
So,
Ms.
Mr.
Byers,
Fry,
can
do you mind
Ms.
Byers,
Byers, can you hear? Can you hear now, Ms. Byers?
You
No?
can't, okay, am I not?
Barely.
I know, I don't like to be heard. What my question was, when on the $5 million loan that is available, what kind of terms is that going to be? I was just wondering if the terms are going to be better than some other, than bonding based on, knowing how it's going to be paid back. Are these terms better than what we would be able to do going
With
to
bonds.
market and doing a bond?
Mr. Fry.
Yes, these are EESI's Energy Efficient Schools Initiative. It's a state of Tennessee program. It's a 14-year term with a 0.5% interest rate.
That's good.
Yes.
Okay.
And we currently have a EESI loan that we took out about 10 years ago that we've been paying out of our operating budget.
Will the one you currently have roll off, or when will
It will
it?
roll off in about 4 years.
In about 4 years, so there'll be additional money. Okay. Second, we're doing this for 10 years, so knowing that we're anticipating as many as 200 new students within the next several years, and knowing that that will change your funding, are you thinking that there will be more money to go into phase 2 sooner, or are you just at this point looking at a 10-year, like let's do phase 1 over 10 years and then come back and introduce phase 2, or based on your all's conversations, when are you looking at starting phase 2 or phase 3 or flopping?
Well, right now, with our Board of Education, we've not had a conversation about phase 2 or 3 at all. Right now, right now, it's hard to talk about phase 2 or 3 when you haven't even started phase 1, or we've only got half of phase 1 completed. And so it would be our intent that when we talk about these 10 years, it's not 10 years to implement phase 1. We would like to have phase 1 completed at the end of the 22-23 school year. It would be our intent to be able to open Sullivan North to students, or the new Sevier to students in the fall of 23. Am I right? Looking at, we've gotten pushed back. We've gotten pushed back a couple years. One, because of COVID. We didn't take any bond dollars. And then also, Sullivan County enacted the turnover of the school clause in the contract to keep the school for 1 additional year. So we're kind of off of our time frame by 2 years. And so that's the reason I'm looking at over here is to know what the number of years shift that we're on. So that really takes the completion of the facility study from 2029 really to 3031, because we've added 2 years onto that. Okay. Is there anything you would add to that, Mr. Fry?
No, we'd be looking at, like you said, moving into the new Sevier, the north facility in August of 23, and having a renovation of the old Sevier, New Jackson, in August of 24.
So by year 4 of this, we would like to have phase 1 completed.
So at this point, we have not yet had our board retreat this year, but at that retreat, we will initiate some discussions about the new phase 2. Right now, we're working on getting phase 1 behind us and making sure all of that is in motion. It's an excellent question. Ms. Cooper, I think you're...
Well, without these ESSER ESSER, I mean, it changes the whole outlook of everything. I said, without the money that you didn't expect,
Right.
that it would have been a whole different conversation. So, I mean, I think that changes a lot. Now, and a lot of it, I guess, is phase two. I see your phase one, because I know Sevier, I was looking in Sullivan North was built to accommodate like 1,600 students. And I think they have 600 now. And Sevier has 825 or so. So when you move Sevier to North, you're going to have a lot of space, a lot of.
Well, yes, so I guess I want to draw attention to that is when because you even have to think about this from a capacity when you talk about Jackson into
Sevier.
into Sevier, is that the program space at Sullivan North was built for 1,600, but we're not going to have vocational, like that whole vocational wing right there won't have 25 kids in them in each one of those bays. So we're taking off that program space because we're going to be utilizing at least part of it for maintenance facilities. Okay. Also, when they talk about building it for 1,600, that's with a class size of 35 in a classroom. And so when you talk about middle school sizes, your middle school class sizes are capped at 30. And so you, just by the grade bands that you serve, if you have younger grade bands, your class size maximums are smaller. And so, yes, while they were programmed, built for that at that time, when you serve different grade bands, you change the capacity of the number of students that you can serve in that facility.
And one other comment, I know that you said you're taking off Jackson, which is 100 years old, and I understand that. But you're moving Jackson to Sevier, which is your second oldest school, which is 95 years old. So you're, age-wise, you're moving it to another school that's almost 5 years younger.
So it's my understanding, again, this is the con of not growing up here or being here this entire time. It's my understanding is that 2/3 of that building is brand new construction. And so that really the original building is on the front, but everything else that's behind that is new construction. And so
Yeah, I went to the.
from that standpoint.
It looks different than when I went to Sevier. So.
And so with that, yeah, I mean, trying to maximize, the opportunity that we have with our ESSER dollars. Yes, well, I mean, we can have a different conversation today about the path forward and how this could be accomplished over the next 10 years in a much different way than we could even January.
And because they're your ESSER dollars, I think we have less, I feel like we have less say-so in, because, they're the BOE's money to decide how to spend, so.
And Colette, I think part of your question also was had to do with enrollment.
Yeah, and that's what I want to, just
right.
looking at that.
And if we look at the DeJong Richter projections of enrollment, at least for the next 5 years, of course, they only projected out 10 years from when the study was done. And so we're right in the middle of that right now. And their numbers have proven, as we saw, to be fairly good. What they're projecting is for the next 5 years is that we would not grow from their projections more than about less than 100 students. Now, we could acquire some more if there's new housing developments as we discussed, but as far as the effect on funding from the state based on our enrollment, I don't see that is going to be enough of an increase to really make that much of a difference funding-wise for us.
The pandemic has created a lot of change, which did give us this money, which is we're got to have some good. But in looking at the growth of Kingsport, in that we have so many people trying to move here right now, and because of the strength and the reputation of our education system, a lot of the people that now have an option to live anywhere are choosing to move here because of our education in our schools. So as a realtor, I feel we're going to have a larger growth of young families. And I think in looking at where these housing projects are going and where you all are looking, and I know you haven't had your retreat, and I hope you really do focus on looking at the capacity, because it seemed like some of the older schools were in the 60 and 70 range capacity where some of these new projects are going. But I didn't know at what point, I mean, obviously you've got to redistrict before you've opened Jackson, or really before you've opened Sevier, I assume. You'll redistrict for the middle schools. But are you all working with the building department on looking at where the housing is going? So when you start redistricting, you will take into consideration the growth and I mean, obviously Sevier can hold a lot more people than Jackson.
Yes.
So is that footprint for, you've got Sevier and, I mean, you know where all your schools are. You've got several really clustered together. So the redistricting, when are you all going to really put something out for that for the public? And I know you're going to do a retreat, but that's my question, just in looking at enrollment.
That's an excellent question, and it's obviously something we have to address capacity-wise very quickly, particularly with the situation at John Adams. So we will obviously start to examine those things on what needs to be done, let's say in the next year. We'll examine that right away. With the middle school thing, this is why when we talk about a probable shift from being an east-west thinking town to a north-south thinking town, and where those particular residential developments go in, and we obviously have to factor in the transportation of those students as well, and hopefully have something that looks like it makes sense on a map to balance those two things out. And we'll certainly have that in place well before the new Sevier opens.
Well, Sevier and Robinson historically have been very close in the number of students.
Yes.
I would have to assume that the new Sevier will have more students than Robinson, just because of size, logistics, and some of that. So, I mean, we're going to be a little out of balance with the size of the schools.
Well, I think obviously the opportunity comes in the redistricting to reduce some capacity. I mean, right now, if you looked at if we took back the numbers, there's about a 200 student difference, round numbers. If we reduce the capacity in one, increase the capacity in others, there's still more at North, and it allows room for Robinson to grow by reducing some of theirs as well. And so, yes, that it does address that kind of bottleneck that we have happening right now, particularly at Robinson, that it's over capacity. But I also think that both of those schools reflect kind of, if you looked at the elementary enrollment, those middle schools reflect the enrollments of the schools on those sides of town. And so, it's trying to know how to set up zones so that we're maximizing capacity in our schools, also in the space that we already have, as we consider that as well.
Then when you look at when you do redistrict, I know when I grew up, which was 100 years ago, half of Lincoln went to Robinson and half of Lincoln went to Sevier. It actually, and I know right now it's more school by school. Are you looking at all the different things in terms of will you divide by school, or will you be dividing by street?
We have a committee.
Or have you even talked about it?
We have a committee that's working here with the school district and with the GIS in the city, looking where the kids are living, that we know where they live, and trying to work on that. I know that that's something that committee will be making bringing a report to me that I can share with the board for future consideration on that as well. But I assure you that we're looking at that, knowing that we have these developments that are under construction right now, and how do we accommodate for that growth? But with that said, I would tell you that, you know, not to take us back to 2 and 3, but, you know, as we think about, do we continue to renovate 80-year-old buildings, or do we have planned replacement? And that's a conversation for another time. Because, you know, it used to be that we just had to worry about the facilities that existed in Bristol and Kingsport. Between Kingsport and Johnson City, right off the interstate, exist 2 schools in Washington County that are every bit as nice as Adams right now. And so as people, going to your point, as people look to choose where they live, you know, trying to make sure that we have facilities that look on the outside as great as what's happening on the inside. Because we all know that it's the teacher that makes the difference. And we know it's the curriculum that we offer, and we have amazing things that are going on inside Kingsport City Schools. We just need to be able to have, not everybody gets to walk inside those classrooms. And so as people are driving through the city and choosing where to live, they don't get to walk into the classroom to see those amazing things. They're making judgments based on what they see when they drive by on the outside. Would you agree with that statement?
Yes, sir.
So understand, and I'm sure redistricting to us is about as popular as talking a tax increase is to you.
Yeah, I'm quite aware of that. I just said, you know, we get.
So that's obviously it's a rightfully fragile environment.
Yeah.
It is safe to say, though, that redistricting because of growth is a wonderful problem to have. And the other thing I want to take this opportunity to underscore is that I know that we're very pleased to be an asset to Kingsport, but Kingsport is also an asset to us. And having a community that supports the schools is every bit as economically important as the other way around. And so we want to make this a great place to live. We want low taxes and great schools. And I think you want the same thing. We want schools that look good and that are well cared for, so that even people that don't have children, when they just drive by, they go, that's a good looking place. You know, if I had kids, I'd like for them to go to school there. So all those things are very, very important to us as we move forward. And I know they're important to you as part of the growth of the city is as well.
I guess my question will kind of take a little bit different approach, because it's what I've been asked over the last couple of weeks, and by different citizens just really across our city. And so it's a separation between want and needs. And how closely have y'all looked at? I know there's so many needs up here with roofing and, you know, HVAC systems and different things like that. I know that is part of it, but have there been any separation to kind of look at some of that stuff? Because that's what people's kind of concerned with, at least it's contacted me.
So just so I better understand the question, is there something in particular that they're viewing that appears to be more of a want than a need?
I think at least one said, you know, more cosmetically, was looking at, you know, certain things as cosmetically, you know, can you do this or can you do that from another, I don't know whether that's painting or what. They mentioned, you know, some painting, carpeting. Can you live with what you've got for a while, or does it just need to be totally? I mean, that's kind of been the concerns that I've been approached with for this. And so I think it's a legitimate question for the, you know, to say we're looking at, you know, things that we can use or recycle or do whatever we can, you know, to put back in if we can do that.
I think we're inheriting that at North. North was something that was just paint and facade, and then when you get in the interior, it's millions of dollars to get it back up to snuff. Is unfortunate, right? There's a certain level at which we maintain the city schools so that we do have a great environment in which people want to come and move into. It's a legitimate question. It's a question we ask, I think,
I'm
constantly.
not being
No,
argumentative,
I mean,
I'm just
I-
saying that's what's, what I've been approached with, especially since the Board of Education Forum at Kiwanis. So I've been asked that at least 4 or 5 times.
No, it's a great question. I think we constantly look at that and say, what has to be done and what can be done and what needs to be done, right? And I don't think we've ever, as a board, I don't want to speak for everybody here, but as a board, I don't think we've ever taken anything as like, man, this is highfalutin here. We're getting some top dollars. I think everything is as it needs come up here, and then as it really, really needs, and then as it really, really, really needs, and that goes to the front of the line. And so that's kind of how the prioritization of some of this stuff. But it becomes a safety issue at some point.
Well, yeah.
Well, and I also want to assure our citizens that we try to be great stewards of every dollar that we're entrusted. I mean, the $4 million that we had in consolidated projects, that's because we don't allow change orders when we do a project. I mean, we try to only do what it is that we set out to accomplish. And so when we have contingency funds set aside for that, we hope to be able to get those contingency dollars back into our budget so that we can pull those back together and use that on another thing. And it's because of that sound financial management and that approach that keeps us from like I said, for 30, the fact that you've got a 100-year-old building that wasn't renovated since 1989, and we've been able to maintain that and continue to use that for this period of time goes to a great deal of credit to our maintenance staff and to the standards that we have for our school system. I mean, to that point, I think that if it's a slippery slope, that if you start lowering the standard, then that becomes tolerable, and then pretty soon we end up into a place where our buildings and our facilities aren't reflective of the standards that we have it doesn't make it attractive to come and live as a community. And so it's because of those standards that I think that have existed among the city and among the school system that we have is why we've been able to maintain our facilities for as long as we have and get the use out of them.
I have a kind of an interesting perspective on this, having stepped in here. 2 things I'm noticing, kind of alarming to me, is the lack of institutional memory, which is kind of what we're talking. And the other thing is, I said it when Barbara was there, and Ron and I talked about it before. Whenever we set our bar, if we set it to compare ourselves to the state of Tennessee, we're in trouble. That's not who we as Kingsport City Schools want to be. We want to be the people that other people strive to be like, right? I mean, I think, and through all this COVID stuff, everybody's just swimming, trying to keep their head above water. And if you're not careful, to your point, your culture is going to get damaged, and you're going to be down there swimming amongst mediocrity. And that's never who we want to be in Kingsport. This is school system. That's my biggest concern.
I want to make 2 comments too. I said, I'm like Colette, 100 years ago when I was in college, I was doing a practicum at Town Acres in Johnson City. And it was a brand new school then. It was, it was the round classrooms. It was the first time I'd seen a school that was built not just in the shoebox style. And so years later, fast forward years later, I went to Town Acres when I was working at ETSU with student teachers. And I said, I remember coming to this school when I was in college doing a practicum, and he said, you realize this is the oldest elementary school in Johnson City? So I'm thinking, in my life, from college to now, that there's been every other school in Johnson City that's an elementary school is new, and so that it shocked me that was now their oldest school. And I was still in my mind, my college mind was thinking it's a brand new school, but it's not. During my student teaching, doing my residency, when I was supervising student teachers, I was able to go in 7 different school systems in Hawkins County, Johnson City, Washington County, Kingsport, Bristol, and when I came to Kingsport, I was always so proud because our schools, didn't matter the age, they always looked nice. Everything looked well-kept and well-maintained, and that's not, not the case in other schools. I always would tell people that things that were happening in the classroom were equal. I mean, were great. There was, great things happening in all the different districts. But as far as facilities, I would always be proud when I walked into a Kingsport City school, just because you could tell that was, it was maintained so well, even though that I knew after I talked to the guy from 10 Acres that it was, we were dealing with schools that were older, and they were dealing with new schools.
The schools built 80 years ago were built well. Skills,
Yeah.
the schools built in the 70s and 80s were that was a different level of construction then, and I think the time frame some of ours were built, we were very fortunate that we did build at the times we did when people actually used a lot of concrete and did not decide to be trendy. We were very, and you all have done a great job maintaining that.
But also, I don't want to keep talking. I taught at Washington, the old Washington down here on Watauga Street for 17 years. And then I was transferred when we built the new Washington to go out to the new Washington. And the old Washington was the traditional, little classrooms. And just by moving to the new school in 1 year's time, the way I taught changed. And, the way we were able to teach and the way we were able to move the kids around changed. Just because the facilities allowed us all, as we team taught
Great point.
and worked together, it allowed us to teach or to look at teaching differently than we did when you're just in a shoebox in your little classroom. So the facilities do make a difference in the way that you teach and so.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Gold, go right
I was just going to say, I don't know how Johnson City's built 20 schools in 20 years.
This is elementary.
I'm joking.
Oh, yeah.
Saying it's only been 20 years since you've been out of
Oh,
college.
yes, exactly. Oh, you're saying,
I was paying you a very kind compliment.
I was just 19, but
Child prodigy.
The one thing I would say is that the investment that we make into North, right there, is our sound investment dollars. I guess I want to be able to articulate that, is that once we get that to the Kingsport standard, that is, that's going to be, at 40 years old, that's our third newest building in the school system. And so when we make that investment, when we get that to the standard that we want and we get our kids in there, we'll have been able to bring on our third newest building in the school system. So
In looking at the current projects, I know that $4 million, about $800,000 was interest. And, with these new, you have time limits, and I know you guys are already thinking in terms of how quick you've got to get this spent to use this new money on the projects, that need to be done. And do you feel confident that we will be able to get into North and to get into some of these others to be able to get these projects completed, to use that money first? Is that the goal, so that
That's
we
the
can
goal.
get, is it a reimbursement project where we spend it, they pay us back with these particular funds, or is it a gift up front, and if you don't spend it, you return it?
Mr. Fry?
He's getting tired of me, I can tell.
I told you, you saw that he has the microphone with him, so.
It's grant money, so it'll be reimbursement.
Okay.
Yes.
So we will not benefit from the interest of having that money. That money,
No.
we need to hold the other money, spend every penny of this first, and you've got everything in place. So the minute.
And so when we talk about this, I mean, so while we've got these fundings in place, I mean, there's going to be challenges, because there's going to be certain things that qualify for ESSER dollars within the North project, and certain things that, like doing the roof, doing the HVAC, doing certain things will all qualify. There'll be certain things that won't qualify, that we'll have to use other funding streams to pay for there. And so it's going to be very strategic about how trying to get these funds spent in the windows that they can on things that qualify as ESSER expenses. And so anytime that we can charge anything against our general operation, like our virtual days that we had for getting our teachers vaccinated, we were able to charge that against our ESSER dollars that we'll turn around and return to fund balance so that we have a longer window to spend that.
Okay.
And so anything that we can charge against ESSER, either from general operations or against projects that will allow us to extend the windows and increase flexibility, is what we will do to be able to fit those in those timeframes. Does that make sense?
So it's like if Johnson, I don't think it does, but if Johnson needed a new air system, you would buy that and take the money that you would spend for that and put it, I mean, you'd use the ESSER dollars for that and then put that money back into the renovation of North on the things that wouldn't cover, like painting or whatever.
So I look at Mr. Fry.
Well, and Johnson will require some HVAC and some ventilation upgrades.
That's ESSER dollars you'll spend.
Yes.
And then you'll put the money in your capital reserve that you would have spent on that to go back for capital to.
Well, yeah, I mean,
Mike.
we have $17-18 million worth of ESSER projects identified. And about 5.8 million at North.
She couldn't
You
hear.
move that mic closer. Julie's having a hard time hearing.
But you can prolong that date to get back to Dr. Moorhouse's. If you take it from capital and move it down, it kind of pushes that date back some.
The work that we do in any of our schools that can qualify for ESSER funding, that would normally come out of our general purpose dollars, we could channel that back. And so, again, we're just trying, we will be as creative, and again, the ESSI loan, all that is looking to try to find ways to extend our capital work that we can do, and it still be able to pay for it out of our general operating budget. And so, should we choose to go that route, but that's another funding source. That's a conversation. Right now, we have them, some of the work that they would have normally done would have been HVAC work. And so we're trying to identify if there's other work that we could get done using these dollars that we could get done that wouldn't qualify for ESSER. We're trying to extend the work that can be done.
In that regard, when you're talking about the system-wide project of putting all the lights in that's going to save a lot of money,
That's LED,
are you
yep.
concerned with being able to get lights to put in? I mean, because everything is so back-ordered, is that going to factor into any of your spending? Or have you all as a school been able to, I know a lot of builders are struggling to get supplies because there's such a shortage. Are you all comfortable you'll be able to get the things you need like that to save the money? And I mean, is that already in your pipeline?
The group that we're talking with, that I anticipate that this will be something that this particular project will be something that we'll be bringing before our board in April, for that very reason, is that we want to be, there is a concern that if we don't act on that soon, that they feel like they can service us now, but if we wait very much longer, that we could have a problem. So kind of going back to this meeting right here is when we leave today, understanding the funding sources that we need to be able to accomplish these becomes important, because to maximize the time window that we have requires commitments on everybody's part, because we have not entered into that next phase of conversations with architects. The 60% drawings or the solidifying of numbers, because you don't typically look to do that until you have the funding sources identified for the work. Because if you pay for that work and you aren't ready to go to operations, then the dollars and all that other stuff aren't good anymore. And so, if the BMA and the BOE feels good about this, then that would be things that we would take to our architects, and we would start implementing this plan at this point.
Can you, I asked two questions about the, how some of the renovations are spread out, particularly at Dobbins Bennett and the new Severe, and Jackson, the new Jackson, the current Severe building. Can you describe a little bit of those, what those larger ticket items are, particularly?
I am really glad you brought that up, is that while the numbers are in there for Jacks or for the Severe to be Jackson, I'm sorry, the wording on all this, we're going to have to come up with that. While those are the numbers that we have right now, we believe that that number can be less, and are in conversations with the architects. We just haven't been able to hear back from them yet. But in some of it, it was expanding some classrooms and in looking at class sizes across our district, the class sizes that exist, room sizes, okay, not class size numbers, but space sizes, that the spaces that exist within our district are consistent with the space sizes that are there currently. And so the need to do some of the construction that they had identified in there won't be necessary. But we don't know what dollar amount that will impact if you took that project out, or that part of the project out. But part of it is adding part of it is adding bathrooms, part of it is changing out big people toilets to little people toilets, things of that nature. Mr. Fry, is there anything else that you would add to that piece of the conversation?
Well, say for example at Dobbins Bennett, in year one, you've got about $6.2 million. That is basically replacing the roof, because that is ESSER dollars, and that's got to be spent before the timeline runs out. Originally, that $6 million for a roof was spread out 5-6 years.
We would have done a section of it at a time. But in this scenario,
but because of the time frames of the ESSER money, we've got to spend that money. We got to spend that money first, and then in the first year, basically in year 3, that's mechanical, electrical, mechanical. It's very little cosmetic stuff. And then you get into some of your renovations of your pods and some of that stuff a little bit later. So a lot of infrastructure stuff in that Dobbins Bennett project. On the Severe project, hopefully we can reduce that $2.6 million down a little bit. We may need some of that money actually in the year before. We may have to move a little bit of that money up. But we're trying to spread that, at least the Dobbins Bennett money, we're trying to spread that out a little bit so that it levels out the funding that our funding needs. You know, we didn't want to have a particular year where we needed to go to the city to say we need $15, $20 million in this year. We wanted to kind of spread it out to have an even cash flow from the city.
and then even some of the work at Dobbins Bennett, I mean, trying to think through how you get some of the, like, in the renovation of a pod, it's going to be very strategic that we're going to have to do this like in some summers. Is like, how do you replace the carpet inside that building when you have students, there? And so trying to be very strategic about when you can get some of that renovation work done is what causes some of that to be stretched out as well.
Would it be possible for us to get a copy of these slides, but also a better breakdown of what Mr. Fry is saying and kind of explaining a little bit more about those numbers? Because as Darrell said, you know, we do get questions on our level that are more, you know, is the school just, you know, wanting a lot of fluff? And it would be very helpful when I mean, you know, it's a roof, it's bathrooms, it's, you know, when you have a list and you know, and it, as you know, the public, even though we try to get this information out to them 27 different ways, one person will post on Facebook that we're spending $8 million, for a new playground at a school that had a great playground because they played on it when they were there. And then we all get the questions brought up. And, what Eric just asked is, if we could get the breakdown, I don't need the detail that you all get, but just something saying that, this money is a roof for DB, an HVAC here, as you talked about, switching out big toilets for little toilets. A little bit of a breakdown with the slides that explain how the money is, like the one a couple back that I really like that shows each school each year. Because when you look at a big picture, I can explain that breakdown a lot more than I can say the schools need $68 million. Because most people feel, when I went to Dobbins, but when I was at Lincoln School, that school was great. I can't understand why y'all need to make changes now. The playground equipment was good enough for me. So it helps when you can kind of have this plus a little bit different information that we can show, because in the public's eye, nobody thinks that a roof is $13 million. If you ask the general public what would a roof on DB be, most of them would think, it'll probably cost all of $500,000 to roof that place. You have a lot of engineers and they could do it for that price. But, that's why if we could get a little bit more of this data, it really does help me explain why these are needs. And when you're asking us to bond $6 million for 4 straight years, it gives and I get, you all, yes, ESSER money, you're doing the best of your ability to do, and yes, our buildings are older, but they're great. It gives us what we need to answer those questions so the public starts understanding a little bit, educating them a little bit more, because you all see this every day, just like we look at a lot of our numbers every day. And unfortunately, the public is getting, what it costs to build put a roof on from Facebook. And so the data, your point is really well taken if we can just have one extra slide that does do this. And I'd love to get a copy of these if you don't mind emailing this to us.
I'm fairly sure we can make that happen.
One thing that I think might be beneficial is when you drive down the waste water treatment that's being done, all the renovations that go around the city, there's big boards up that says this $6 million is going towards the area. I always read them. Probably the only one in the city that reads those things. But I think something like that, if you put a sign up that says $6 million to replace the roof at DB and put it out front so people understand where the dollars are going, that might be something that's beneficial. Or at least we can create the placard and put it on Facebook so then you can share it. So is that something that?
Yeah,
okay.
just as said, I am much more comfortable with numbers when you tell me what needs you have, how much they cost to address, and the years you're addressing them, and how you have done a great job. 10 years from now, I'm going to need a new HVAC here. I wish people that had houses would plan like that. But with that data and some cost, what those dollars are going to, it really allows us to tell people, yes, we're going to have to bond $6 million, but this, here is what you're leveraging and what you're doing and what it's being spent on, and it's not just, like Daryl said, wants versus needs, because that people,
Sure.
It said, you all do a great job trying to get this information out, but it's very hard to combat what is put on Facebook as really the truth and the facts of how we spend our money.
Mm-hmm.
So just any data that I would have, I would greatly appreciate it, because again, we are going to justify why we're bonding $6 million for 4 straight years. And to a lot of people, $6 million seems like a whole lot of money until you realize $6 million in terms of education and facilities this size is really, I'm glad the state's giving it to us and all that, but it's not a lot of money.
I'm glad that you feel good about seeing how it's all spread across all the schools. And that when you are paying for that, whether your kid goes to DB or goes to, Lincoln, that when you're paying this, every school is being touched as we do this. So, and again, I want to go back to beginning is that a lot of this is just scheduled replacement. I mean, it was an investment our community made 30 years ago, and we're at end of life on those investments. That when we try to equate that back, everybody has their general maintenance at house as well. That if you put on the roof, 30 years later, you know you got to replace it. And when you put in a new HVAC unit, you know that 25 to 30 years later, you're going to be replacing that HVAC unit. And that those are, as you go back to that slide, that when that last renovation was done, you know, we're past 30 years on some of those. And so part of this is just reinvesting again. Yes, sir.
Mayor?
Your target date for students entering the building we now call North would be August
Of 23.
23.
Correct.
Yes, sir.
This is a random question, but did you all expect this much money, or was it, how surprised were you when, I mean, was this something you anticipated?
Each one, you know, well, when ESSER 1, there was no idea that there was going to be an ESSER 2.
Okay. You're just.
And then you made plans around that, then it was like, they're discussing an ESSER 3. And each one, you just never knew really how much money was going to come out. And so we just really found out what our allocations were last week for ESSER 3 and really have to start working on submitting our plans for how we're going to spend those dollars here over the next couple of weeks. Dr. Stringham and her team have, I mean, the first people that have dibs at the dollars are curriculum and instruction. You know, we're going to do whatever we can to address the learning loss first. Whatever's left over, that's what we put into our capital. And so they work on whatever their strategies and plans are for the use of those dollars. And then once they say, all right, here it is, they turn that over to Mr. Fry, and then Mr. Fry takes it from there.
So it's a minimum of 20%, you said. I mean, the 20% is
Yes,
a minimum.
minimum 20% towards programs for learning loss.
And looking at that, pull this back, I'm sorry, I'm asking so many questions, but in looking at that, a lot of school systems, I'm sure, are not as prepared as you all are to spend those funds. And if schools don't spend them, will they be going back into a pot maybe to be redistributed to schools that have additional needs and can spend them? Or as any, there's no conversations at that at this point?
So I do think that we don't know. I think the answer is we don't know yet. I do think that when they give us a deadline like of September, that there's probably another deadline out there that goes to the state, let's say January, that they will recollect those monies and try to make sure that there's, at least from the state level, that there's a use of those funds somehow before they would send them back. I know that they've been very prescriptive to us, that this is not one of those go ahead and do and ask for permission later, that if you don't get authorization for the projects that you're going to use these on, that you could find yourself as a school district in a repayment of funds situation.
So the good news is we have the money. The bad news is that everybody has the money.
But if you all didn't have the North project to do, you would be brainstorming big time about how to
Big
spend
time.
that money.
Big time.
Because, I mean, the North project, those
Yeah.
funds, you naturally, direct them toward there because that was the big project. But if, without that, you all would have a lot of money to spend
Right.
and try to figure.
I'm pretty confident we could find ways to
Yeah,
spend
I'm sure you
it.
could, but I'm just saying, you didn't have that huge big ticket item, that one
Yeah.
big ticket item, so you would be doing.
We'd be asking for more money.
Yeah.
We did.
Yeah, we
Right.
This would be a begging session instead of a work session, right? It would be, I guess, the equivalent of, you're needing a new roof and a new heat pump and a new car and all that other kind of stuff all at the same time. It is, yeah, go ahead, Mayor, sorry.
Jim, you mentioned, y'all talked about the roof at DB. What are the other high-cost drivers for DB?
I think the mechanicals are a high-cost driver because that's really expensive stuff when you get in there. And David, anytime somebody says money, I go, David, the the I don't want to call it aesthetic because it's past aesthetic. The pods need to be updated. The carpet's done. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Fry.
There's a few $1 million for, like $1.2 million renovations in each of the pod areas for complete carpet replacement. A lot of that's just based upon a per square footage dollar amount. But there's a lot of mechanical, other than a roof. I mean, I've got mechanical for the dome, for the main building, for CTE, for band, electrical, plumbing upgrades, just a number of things when that building was renovated back in the mid-90s that, like we've been talking about, those things are 30 years old now. Some of the things, we're replacing 2 of the main switch gears in that facility now. It's original equipment. A lot of that stuff that is in that building is original equipment. It's not 30 years old. It's 50 years old. So there are some aesthetics, that bring things up to date a little bit. The dome lobby is dated. There's some things that, make it look a little bit better, but 95% of the stuff in there is stuff that.
David, it's hard for us old DB grads to realize that DB building has been a high school longer than the original DB building was a high school.
Yes, sir.
That's correct.
So, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'm one of those old DB grads, too.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, currently we're still planning to actually shift the students and start classes in the new Sevier, the current Sullivan North, in the fall of 2023.
Correct. That's the time frame that's the calendar that we're on. What the layout of the timeline, we would need to be able to get architects going, get those designs, get those bids out, award those bids in the fall.
No, it'll be a year from now.
A year from now. By that time, by the time all the work goes in, it'll be about a year from now before we could get the bids out.
Well,
Then them take the year, about 16 months.
Yeah, we would hope to be finished with the renovations, in probably late May, early June, to give us time to move in.
We would like to have all summer.
We should be having bids out on the street maybe in January, and then having board approvals about this time next year.
Got it. So my question is just, it looks like all the 18 million is allocated to the 21-22 school year. Is that just because we want to front load that as much as possible to spend the ESSER dollars, or is that?
Yes. Yes. I mean, we're trying to spend the ESSER dollars as quickly as possible on the multiple projects, but
well, and also
you might probably.
Well, and also when you do a project like that, I mean, when you award a contract to a general contractor for $16 million for the renovation of a facility, you've got to have the money available and appropriated on the front end.
Mm-hmm. At that time?
Yes.
At that time.
Got it.
Yeah, so we'd have to have the money available and ready to be available and appropriated by this time next year.
So it's not possible to spread that 18 million over 2 years, because we're going to have most of it during
No, before you can award a contract for, say, $16 million, you've got to have the $16 million appropriated.
Got it.
It's a cash flow.
On the front end. Now, we won't be paying it out in a lump sum. We'll be paying it out over the year and a half. But we've got to have the money available and appropriated on the front end.
Got it. Thank you.
Are there things like the roof at North that can be done before you start the renovation inside? I mean, some,
So to that point, I mean, if we had the contract already bid out or thing, I don't know. That's a good question, Mr. Fry.
I didn't know if you could, get some things done that that have to be done before you start the big renovation of the inside, like the roof or the.
Other questions or comments?
Board, Gerald, James?
Well, just two questions, I guess. One, if you take Sevier and North out of this equation, the rest of the money, would you consider it, if I was explaining it to myself and to a regular citizen out there, it's really a perfect storm of things hitting end of life near the same time. And you think basically maybe some things that need to be replaced in 30 years and we're at 32 years and now we have the opportunity to go ahead and replace it. Would that be a dumbed down version of what we're talking about here?
Yes.
And then my second question is, when you were showing Adams up there, I just have concern, I guess, and you guys, I'm sure, will work this out over your retreat, but I think you said it was at 101% capacity. Is that right?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, Robinson is. Yeah.
Oh,
No,
Robinson.
that was Robinson, but Adams is at 96%.
Adams at
96%.
96. So just knowing what we have going on, you know, we have all the largest home builder in America is out there working, and then you've got another development that was just approved for something like 200 lots that is not far from there that'll be zoned for Adams. So do you hope to fix that problem with the school being overpopulated with redistricting? But because it's such a, I won't say it's an outlier school, but you know, all that housing is out there and that's the closest school to it. So is the solution going to be redistricting? Are we looking at a capital expense that may pop up of having to renovate, or do you know that yet?
Well, obviously, at some point, we'll have to renovate Adams. I mean, somewhere down the line. We don't, first of all, don't know that yet. But we'll obviously have to do something redistricting so that Adams can handle the capacity. It is geographically an outlier school, as you know, it's way distant, I think, from all of our other school properties. And so we just have to look at where the numbers are, and you know, obviously questions will arise like, do we need to add on to Adams, right, to the physical building of it in order to accommodate the growth in that area? Those are all things for consideration.
With the replacing Jackson with Sevier and Sevier going into North, and we've added a large amount of capacity, do you know how much capacity, how much additional classroom space was gained by getting North and getting rid of Jackson, about how much we gained?
I don't know the exact square footage or number of classrooms.
I think that I guess the reason it's hard to answer that is we have the architect designs for what the Jackson into Sevier, what their designs are. We are in conversation with them is that we don't think that we have to do that, and so instead of losing classrooms, because they were talking about expanding sizes, is that we don't have a solid answer on what the net gain or loss is, because we're back into conversations with, we don't think we have to implement all that plan that the architect has put in place for the future Jackson. If that makes sense. And so, because what I would tell you is that, I mean, and this goes back to conversations that we would have with the Board of Education about spaces. Where is the net gain, and what is the plan for how we utilize those spaces? Do we consolidate down special ed services into areas to create more space back at other schools where some of those programs exist? Do we rezone? So how do we want to effectively use the net gain of space that we have from a programmatic standpoint and for a planning standpoint?
I'm going to just make one more comment, then I promise I'll be quiet too. Sevier, if you go in Sevier and walk around, it doesn't appear to be an elementary school at all, just like the location of the restrooms and the atrium. And so that's been, every time I go in Jackson, that's my concern. I'm still a kindergarten teacher, so I look at it, and it doesn't, there's nothing about about Sevier that looks like an elementary school, the structure. And that's been a concern for, when I started hearing about this 4 or 5 years ago. You think about Adams and Washington, our two newest schools, and the location of like where restrooms are and steps and, just those kind of things. That's been my biggest concern all along, that Sevier does not look like, and I don't think there's any way to make it look like an elementary school or make it conducive to little guys, just because of like where the bathrooms are. And, if you look at even that 6th grade hall, if you go down the end of that 6th grade hall where the parking lot is, it's a long way to the restroom, the restroom that's at the atrium. So, that's has been my concern, that it's just the layout of it is not elementary. So I don't know that we can do anything about it, but it is what it is.
Look and see, yeah, right. Well, seeing no other questions or comments, Mr. Mayor and members of the board, Mayor and Alderman, we thank you for coming and sharing with us. And
Let me make one
okay,
last comment.
all right, please
First,
do.
Again, thanks for having us, and there was a lot of good information put out, and I've tied a bunch of points together in my mind. One, my hat's off to y'all for doing such a great job of maintaining the schools. I mean, I've never been in a Kingsport City school that I thought was shabby or not well kept.
I hope some of our maintenance and custodial staff are listening to this,
Yeah,
because they do a phenomenal job.
My hat's off to y'all. But, I want to tie in some points. I'll start with the vice mayor made a really great point, about Kingsport, as expressed in an editorial a few days in the Times News, is a great place to be. And a big part of that are, of course, of our schools. And we can attract people that are remote workers, can work from home, or early retirees that want to start a business of their own, or just regular retirees that just want to be at a great place to live. And and then I tie that in with your point that Kingsport, we have a reputation of great schools, especially because of the quality of programs, the quality of instruction, but we also maintain a low cost of living, and low taxes and so forth, which attract those people that Colette brought out. And but I also take to heart my friend Tim Dean's statement about we're not competing with the bottom, we're competing with the best, and that's
right.
We want to be the best. So thank you again for having.
Yeah.
Mr. City Manager, do you want to add anything?
The only thing I'll add is this continuation what Dr. Moorhouse said. We started working on this back in January, and what it looked like in January versus what it looks like today is vastly different. That is due in part to the ESSER dollars that have come into play. So that has definitely changed things. This is definitely a list of projects that very much identifies many of the needs that you all have. I think you'll see that as you see the more detailed information that we're talking about. There's other things that I think were on the board earlier that we've kind of put in the parking lot, if you will. We'll come back and collectively look at how we fund that and get a better understanding going forward. But I think this outlines a very, very good plan for us to continue to invest in just an amazing asset that we have here with our schools. They've been a source of pride forever. The 23 years that I've been here, Kingsport City Schools has always been the school on the hill, the one that we've wanted to focus attention and draw attention to, as you said, not just in the state, but across the Southeast and the rest of the country for that matter. So this plan also allows us to address capital needs that we have on the operations side. As I talked to Dr. Moorhouse and David Fry throughout this, it's very important that each one of us, as we oversee our respective groups, continue to move those forward. And so to be in a position to still be able to make sound capital investments going forward on our end only helps the efforts that you all have on your end. And so that's very important for us. And so again, appreciate it. It's been a good process over the last 3 months, and pleased with where we're at.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. With that, we stand adjourned. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for working with us.